Let's do a little recent history lesson. Yesterday's wretched performance by Senate Republicans was the latest in a long, pathetic attempt by members of a political cult that has spent 6 years trying to desperately avert Americans' eyes from the real perpetrators of COVID lies, President Donald Trump and his spineless minions in Congress, some of who you saw there. The horrors of Fauci talking to Barbara Streisand, Julia Roberts, keeping count of his glowing press accounts, and because no one does that, not the president, and using data from the last U.S. global pandemic to guide early decisions was child's play compared to the deadly lies coming out of the White House. President Trump admitted to Bob Woodward on tape that he refused to prepare Americans for the horrors of COVID because he didn't want to hurt the economy. He withheld that information from the American people. Take a look at what he told Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Bob Woodward.
It goes through air, Bob. That's always tougher than the touch. You know, the touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air. That's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus. You know, people don't realize we lose 25,000, 30,000 people a year here. Who would ever think that, right?
I know.
It's pretty amazing. And then I say, well, is that the same thing? This is more deadly. This is 5 per, this is 5% versus 1%. Well, I think, Bob, really, to be honest with you,
sure, I want you to.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes,
because I don't want to create a panic.
Okay, so he wanted to play it down and not tell the American people about COVID. The President of the United States withholding that information from the American people. But yesterday, not a word from Senate Republicans about that mendacious decision from the president about a virus that would kill millions of people. In January of 2020, Trump said the coronavirus threat was only one person coming in from China. That's a quote. We have it totally under control. That's a quote. It's going to be just fine. That's a quote. This lie came after the president's intelligence community had already been warning him for 2 weeks about the coming threat when he told Americans that reckless claim. No word yesterday from preening lawmakers who were cursing at times on that deadly negligence from the President of the United States. In February, Trump predicted the virus would go away by April. It's like a miracle. It will disappear. That deliberate lie also came weeks after White House staff members warned the virus could imperil millions of American lives while costing the U.S. economy trillions of dollars. In March, the president told worried Republican senators to just stay calm because it will go away. That's a quote. Trump spent much of that month ignoring warnings from the best scientists across the world by declaring that the untested use of a malaria drug to treat COVID-19 could be the biggest game changer in the history of medicine. His own White House had to warn soon after that using this untested drug to treat the virus was dangerous because it caused serious heart problems. Trump's lies continued full force in April, with the flustered president assuring reporters that COVID-19 might not come back at all this fall. It was Dr. Fauci who once again had to correct the president's spurious claims and tell Americans the truth about this deadly crisis. The next day, Trump publicly peppered his staff and medical team about the positive benefits of ingesting bleach and how the implanting of lights might cure pandemic patients.
So supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light. And I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting. Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting to me.
I'd like to point out they had to set up morgues outside New York City hospitals for the thousands of dead people. And this president is talking about injecting bleach. Once again, it was Dr. Fauci and Trump's own administration that had to warn the public against placing any credence in the president's maniacal ramblings on this. Maniacal. Screaming Republicans somehow neglected yesterday to once again place blame where it belonged, at the feet of their cult leader. They're too scared. They were too busy performing for him. While these crazed remedies and delusional denials were trotted out by Trump at his bizarre daily press conferences, 1.2 million Americans died of a COVID virus that Trump said would go away miraculously in April of 2020, and that his most powerful allies on Fox News said was being used to bludgeon Trump again with this new hoax. These deaths do not rest solely on the president's shoulders, of course. China's communist regime bears much of the responsibility for refusing to warn the world of the horrors unfolding in its country. But even this raises the question why Trump praised China's communist regime in late January. China has been working very hard to contain the coronavirus, the president tweeted. The United States greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency, in particular on behalf of the American people. I want to thank President Xi. Trump's kowtowing to China about their transparency had to be particularly galling to administration officials who had spent December and January trying to get Xi's regime to share virus samples and healthcare data that could have greatly helped prepare America for the coming pandemic. A year of delusional decisions coming from the White House did not produce a miracle cure. Instead, not Anthony Fauci's good faith efforts to save lives, made Americans more vulnerable to a deadly pandemic and a debilitating financial collapse. Republicans cherry-picking parts of Fauci's diaries to pose for cameras while screaming vulgarities at a man who spent a career trying to save American lives show the party to be hypocritical, out of touch, and irredeemable on the subject of COVID. And they know better. We still need answers on the origins of this deadly virus and the miscalculations made by our government during the pandemic. But starting a hearing by promising jail time for the man who could answer that question is the last way to get those answers to the American people once again. And ignoring the president's steady stream of lies on hiding this virus from the American people is just simply grotesque.